The fight over water in Germany has begun. Just outside Berlin, Tesla is expanding. Red Bull also plans to grow. And deep underground, a new copper mine is being planned. How much these companies pay for their water hasn't been made public. Parts of the groundwater data have been redacted.
They don't care what happens to our water or what happens to the people who live here.
All of this is happening in Brandenburg, a region once considered rich in water, but now one of the driest parts of Germany. In the small Brandenburg town of Baruth, 60 kilometers south of Berlin, mineral water has been bottled since the 1990s. The companies Red Bull and Rauch took over the site in early 2023. Now they want to expand production with a new canning plant and additional facilities planned in the heart of a water protection zone. Many locals fear the expansion will put even more pressure on the region's scarce water.
The climate has changed, and for the past 10 years, groundwater levels here have been falling. The soil is getting drier and drier. It's a fact. Our fear is that one day there won't be enough water.
The Baruth waterworks are licensed to extract a fixed amount of groundwater each year. 92% of that amount has been reserved for Red Bull and Rauch. Just 8% remains for the local drinking water supply. Red Bull and Rauch's annual water use alone is equivalent to the yearly drinking water needs of 57,000 people in Germany. That's all legal under decades-old contracts, says Peter Ilk. Few people have shaped Baruth's development as much as he has. Mayor for nearly 25 years, he has been a driving force behind the area's industrial growth. He doesn't see water as a problem.
We've always given priority to supplying local people. That's written into all the contracts. But to be fair, we don't have a very large population. My 4,300 residents consume a certain amount of water, and that's simply what they need. A beverage factory obviously uses much more. That's why the ratio of water usage is roughly 1 to 10.
Irina Engelhardt is a professor of hydrogeology in Berlin and has spent years studying Brandenburg's groundwater resources.
I'm increasingly concerned about Brandenburg's water resources. I think the problem is that the available water resources, what we call the water supply, are currently being overestimated by the authorities in Brandenburg.
The contracts underpinning the beverage company's current water rights date back to the 1990s, a time when climate change and water scarcity were barely part of the debate in Brandenburg.
Factors have changed. Groundwater levels have fallen. Groundwater recharge has changed along with land use. The study doesn't reflect those changes.
That's why Engelhardt and local residents are calling for new independent studies that are publicly available.
The town keeps saying there's constant monitoring to make sure everything is fine. So we requested the data from the State Environmental Agency, and this is what we got: pages and pages of blacked out tables. They told us the information was redacted to protect the location of wells, which are apparently secret. But the wells are right here, next to a public trail.
For security reasons, the exact locations of the wells have not been made public. Local residents, however, believe it is the groundwater monitoring data that is being kept from public view and are calling for greater transparency. We contacted Rauch for comment more than a month ago. By the time of publication, the company had not responded to our request. For drought expert Andreas Marx, the issue is about a fundamental principle.
By law, water is a public commodity. It can't be privately owned. So, in my view, every decision made and every contract signed over its use should be open to the public.
Another concern, water prices aren't public either. What Red Bull and Rauch pay for the 7 million liters of groundwater they can extract each day remains confidential.
The question is, what's a fair price? And should an industrial company using water for cooling pay the same as a company that sells the water itself, like a beverage producer? Germany lacks a national framework for this.
But just how serious is the situation? Is the region already running out of water?
We're not at the point of saying we're running out of water. We're in a transition phase.
Germany and Brandenburg are still water-rich regions. The challenge isn't adapting to permanent water scarcity. The challenge is learning how to cope with dry periods that can last 2 or even 3 years.
Across Brandenburg, dry summers, less rainfall, and increasing evaporation have put growing pressure on water resources.
And with that comes very low groundwater recharge. In other words, very little replenishment of our groundwater reserves. Since 2018, Germany has experienced widespread groundwater scarcity for the first time.
That means the system is shifting, it's changing. In some areas, groundwater levels have fallen by as much as 2 meters over the past 20 years.
Brandenburg gets 95% of its drinking water from groundwater. The falling groundwater levels are also visible in many of Brandenburg's lakes, which are getting drier. Heike Christoph has lived by Kleiner Kolpiner See for more than 30 years. She spent her childhood holidays here with her grandparents and has watched the lake change ever since.
We used to sit on this jetty in winter, put on our ice skates and skate straight into the lake. Now you can see the water level has dropped by at least 1.5 meters. And even though you can see the water here again, it's only 20 or 30 centimeters deep.
The lake is mainly fed by groundwater. When groundwater levels fall, the lake's water levels fall as well, and the effects are already being felt.
Our amphibian populations are collapsing. We used to have toads, newts, snakes. Most of them have disappeared, and maybe for good.
At the same time, new industrial projects are raising questions about how much water Brandenburg will have left in the future. Just a few kilometers from Kleiner Kolpiner See, Tesla has built its factory in the small town of Grünheide, in an area already facing groundwater stress. Tesla's gigafactory has faced local opposition ever since it was first announced in 2019. Manu Hoyer has been involved since the start.
Many projects, including new schools and kindergartens, were put on hold because there wasn't enough water.
Tesla's water use has been controversial for years. The company has been granted permission to use 1.4 million cubic meters of water annually. Tesla plans to significantly expand production at its Grünheide factory, with a target of producing up to 7,500 vehicles per week. As production expands, securing a reliable water supply for the site becomes increasingly important. According to Tesla's 2025 annual report, the company's water consumption has fallen significantly, thanks to its in-house recycling system. We asked Tesla for comment. By the time of publication, the company had not responded. For many locals, it's no longer just about how much water is used. It's about who takes responsibility and who's asked to cut back as water becomes more scarce.
Private water users are usually the first to face restrictions, simply because they're the easiest to limit. Industrial companies are rarely restricted because the economic consequences are much harder to assess.
Many of these major projects are seen as economically and strategically important. They create jobs, attract investment, and produce materials needed for the energy transition. That's what makes the conflict so difficult, because this kind of development needs water too. The arrival of Tesla has further increased demand for commercial and industrial land, according to Brandenburg's Economic Development Agency. Just 25 kilometers from Tesla, another major industrial project could soon take shape. Here in Fürstenwalde, a vast industrial and business park is planned, covering an area that would amount to more than a third of the city's entire built-up area. Which companies will eventually move in remains completely unknown. To make way for it, around 250 hectares of this forest right next to the River Spree could be cleared. A citizens' initiative is campaigning against the plans, warning they could have far-reaching consequences.
What we're most afraid of is climate change hitting this region even harder. That could happen if we keep sacrificing our only protection against drought and water shortages for the sake of industry.
The forest consists largely of pine monoculture. Even so, it plays an important role in the region's water balance. Forests store water, cool their surroundings, and help regulate the local water cycle. If this forest were cleared, rainwater could run off the surface much more quickly. The forest soil would also lose its natural filtering function. That's especially important because the River Spree is a key source of Berlin's drinking water. Anyone who clears forest in Brandenburg is generally required to compensate for the loss. But critics argue that a newly planted forest cannot replace a mature one that is already storing water, cooling the landscape, and filtering groundwater. The project remained largely unnoticed. It was only after citizens began campaigning against it that the plans came into the public eye.
There were just 2 or 3 council resolutions buried on an obscure municipal website. We had to dig them up and then make sense of them. Other than that, there was nothing.
For many residents, the project would be a reason to leave the place they call home.
If I knew this forest were going to disappear, if this industrial park were built here, I'd leave. This place just wouldn't be worth living in anymore.
Further south in Brandenburg, another major project is raising concerns. A large copper mine is planned near the town of Spremberg. Over the coming decades, copper is said to be extracted from depths of up to 1,200 meters. The raw material is essential for power grids, electric vehicles, and the transition to clean energy. But mining operations could put drinking water supplies at risk. Geotechnical engineer Michael Pfeiffer explains why.
You have to imagine that the layers of rock above the copper deposit aren't uniform. It's not like a neatly layered cake. They're fractured, with cracks and fissures running through them. Water can seep through those fractures all the way down to the mine. That mine water becomes heavily contaminated, depending on the rock formations it passes through. Above all, it's highly saline and contains sulfur and various dissolved ions. Under no circumstances can water like that simply be discharged into a river, such as the Spree.
The plan is to treat the water before it is discharged.
But the treatment plan proposed so far is nowhere near capable of doing what's actually required to clean the water to a standard where it could be safely discharged into the Spree.
The project could affect drinking water supplies all along the River Spree, even as far as Berlin. The consequences of prioritizing industry over drinking water can already be seen here in Spremberg. To enable lignite mining, groundwater levels were lowered. As a result, iron-rich soil layers were exposed to oxygen. When groundwater levels rise again, iron hydroxide forms, turning sections of the River Spree brown and affecting water quality to this day. For many people here in Spremberg, it's a warning from the past. They fear the planned copper mine could leave behind a new problem.
Open-pit lignite mining dates back to the former East Germany. At the time, it was seen as the only viable way to generate electricity. People in this town and across the region have lived with the consequences ever since. Current estimates suggest that this legacy will continue to affect Spremberg until the end of this century.
Lignite mining in this region is set to end by 2038. Experts warn that during dry summers, the River Spree could then carry up to 75% less water, with far-reaching consequences for water resources all the way to Berlin. One reason is that once mining ends, the groundwater that has been pumped from the open pit mines into the Spree for decades will no longer be available. And additional water will be needed in the coming years to flood former open pit mines as part of their rehabilitation.
If copper mining is ultimately pursued for political reasons, then we need a long-term strategy to safeguard drinking water supplies. But that strategy shouldn't come after the damage is done. It has to be a prerequisite for approving copper mining here in Spremberg.
Whether from mining, industry, or climate change, pressure on Brandenburg's water is growing. The challenge is making better use of the water that's already there. Fortunately, solutions already exist. Hydrogeologist Irina Engelhardt and her team are researching how excess water from rainy and snowy winters can be stored underground as a reserve for dry periods.
There are areas with particularly suitable geological conditions where excess water can be recharged into the ground, either through infiltration basins or injection wells.
One of these sites is located in Hobrechtswälde, Brandenburg. Through these basins, treated wastewater is deliberately allowed to seep into the ground. This helps replenish groundwater reserves and store water for periods of drought. The process is known as artificial groundwater recharge.
We're taking advantage of the natural filtration that happens underground. Microorganisms and clay particles help transform and purify the water as it moves through the subsurface, so that it can later be recovered in a very good quality.
Engelhardt and her team have already surveyed the entire Lower Spree region to identify where this approach could be implemented.
There are areas in Brandenburg, such as the region where Tesla is now located, where artificial groundwater recharge could meet almost the entire water demand of the local drinking water supplier.
But according to Engelhardt, Germany's strict Federal Water Act currently does not allow this method to be implemented on a large scale.
This method is especially suitable for non-potable water uses, whether in agriculture or industry, because it doesn't require the same quality as drinking water.
Still, the approach has its limits.
One limitation is that the water we want to recharge has to be available in the first place. That means we need rivers or other forms of surface water with sufficient flow to provide it.
The challenge isn't just how much water is available. It's also about having clear rules for who gets water and how much during periods of droughts, says Andreas Marx.
To put the urgency into perspective, the term drought isn't even defined in Germany's Federal Water Act.
What is being debated in Brandenburg today is part of a much larger global challenge. From Chile and Mexico to India, industries, agriculture, ecosystems, and communities are increasingly competing for a resource that is becoming ever more scarce: water.